Texas wide receiver Xavier Worthy ran the fastest 40-yard dash in the history of the NFL Combine, but you should not be moving him up your Dynasty ranks. We will explain on this episode of the Locked On Dynasty Football Podcast.
You are Locked On Dynasty Football, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Here are your hosts, Marcus Mosher and Kate Madjuk.
Welcome back to the Locked On Dynasty Football Podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. We'd like to thank you for making us your first listen of the day. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Make every moment more. Right now, new customers can get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. That is $150 if your bet wins. Just visit FanDuel.com/lockedon to get started. I am your host, Marcus Mosher. You can follow me on Twitter at Marcus_Mosher. As always, I'm joined by Kate Madjuk. Check her out on Twitter at Kate Madjuk. On today's show, we're going to be discussing some of the biggest risers from the NFL Combine and if you should be buying or selling them after their Combine performance. Kate, let's start with Xavier Worthy. That 4.21 40-yard dash was pretty exciting, but what are you doing with him in your Dynasty leagues?
Here's the thing, Marcus. Xavier Worthy, wide receiver out of Texas, literally broke the NFL Combine record. John Ross had held that record for a 4.22 40-yard dash. And guess what? We got a 10th of a second in, and boom, we have a record-setting Combine from Xavier Worthy. But I do think we need to temper expectations a little bit, because hear me out, Marcus. We already knew Xavier Worthy was very fast. And you know what? He's a smaller wide receiver, 165 pounds, 5'11". That ranks in the first percentile, 21st percentile, respectively, for weight and height. The interesting thing is, like, he did exactly what you kind of expected him to do. And over the past 2 seasons at Texas, has ranked in the 95th percentile for separation percentage, 42nd percentile in yards per route run, 73rd in yards after the catch per reception. Like, he's been a really solid NFL wide receiver, but I don't think he showed us anything at the NFL Combine that we didn't know. And I'm not buying into the hype necessarily for Xavier Worthy for fantasy specifically. And I think what I'm looking for is, maybe a little bit of a lack of consistency. Marcus, over his, time with Texas, 3 seasons, 7 career games with 100+ receiving yards. 4 of those games came with 10+ targets, including one 24 target outing against Kansas back last year. I mean, it took him a lot of volume to get there. And I do think that, like, when I'm projecting him to the next level, I don't know that I see him as a volume guy. And what I think we do with some of these prospects that come out as very flashy athletes who maybe improve their draft stock a little bit by surprising, I think we all knew he was fast. Did we know he was going to break the Combine record? Maybe not. But I think what we kind of do is get enamored with this athletes. And I think it's definitely a dynasty fantasy problem, and maybe less so a thing for redraft. But we get enamored with these athletes and we don't think about how that necessarily translates to consistency on the field. I just don't see Xavier Worthy projecting as an every down possession type receiver. I think he's a guy that maybe I'll draft in best ball and bid him adieu otherwise.
So you're kind of out on Xavier Worthy. You're selling him after this Combine performance.
Yeah. And you can tell me if I'm wrong, Marcus. You please feel free, because I know he put on an absolutely stellar Combine. I mean, even outside of the 40-yard dash, just was explosive. 41-inch vertical, 10-foot, 11-inch broad jump. Like, he was a 90+ percentile athlete pretty much across the board here. But once again, we kind of have this mentality where we're like, don't double count a player's performance, because we already knew he was a really good athlete. So, like, did the NFL Combine confirm some of the things we saw on the field at Texas? Yes, but I'm not moving him up on my draft board because of that.
I'm not moving him up either. But that's because I already have him really high, Kate. Right now, he's my 5th receiver in this class behind Marvin Harrison Jr., Malik Neighbors, Rome Odunze, and Brian Thomas. I already liked him a lot coming in to the draft. I was just telling somebody right before we got on the phone or right before we got on the podcast that I kind of liked Xavier Worthy as like a late first round pick before the combine. And I feel exactly the same way after. The weight is scary in a vacuum. 165 pounds is not great. I get it. However, the NFL has become more open to these type of players. Like before 2021, we had never had a receiver drafted in the first round or drafted in the top, I believe, top 50 that weighed under 180 pounds. We got Devontae Smith, who was 170 pounds soaking wet at his pro day. We saw Tank Dell this year have a really nice rookie season below 170 pounds. Even somebody like Tutu Atwell, which not a great receiver, but became a pretty functional receiver, was like 155 pounds a few years ago. So the NFL is becoming more open to these type of players. I love Xavier Worthy because 3 seasons of production. He's not just a straight line burner. Actually, a lot of his production happens at or near the line of scrimmage. I just think he's going to be one of these players that gets drafted in the late first round and instantly adds value as a speed weapon. I'm not selling him after the combine because I like where his value is right now.
73rd in yards, 73rd percentile in yards after the catch per reception. Now, I think the comparison to Tank Dell is an interesting one because I do think that the recency bias of Tank Dell coming out and performing in year one, especially the way that he did at his size, is going to have some people giving, more of a pass, I think, for Worthy's overall size. Like, and you know what, like the good thing is he's a tall guy. And the one thing you can improve on at the next level is maybe putting on additional muscle, which
he doesn't need to do a ton of, but like
he doesn't need to do a ton of. And
we see him get to like 175, Kate, like in 3 years.
I think that's fair. But like I look at the comp to Tank Dell, which like very different players. But when we're doing the size comp, obviously Tank Dell is going to be kind of the prototype comparison here for these type of players. And Tank Dell was more productive in college than Xavier Worthy was. So I'm gonna still give Tank Dell that glory of being a tier above. But let's talk about another Texas wide receiver, A.D. Mitchell, who had himself another stellar combine. And I think arguably we could say he had himself a more impressive combine, just given the fact that he's a much bigger wide receiver. I'm going to talk about the height and I'm going to talk about the weight because I think it's important. 6 foot, 205 pounds, ran a 4.35 40-yard dash. Right? 4.35? Did I get that right?
4.34. 4.34.
Official. Sorry, I was looking at the unofficial time. Yes. And Marcus, I think that's pretty impressive. We had a really solid vertical, a really solid broad jump. Like he moved in a way and I think what excites me most about this combine is he tested super well. His relative athletic score ranked 11th out of 3,063 wide receivers dating back to 1987. And Marcus, I'm looking at Mitchell and I have the size, I have the athleticism. Obviously not as productive, but he was a transfer into Texas. So like had 1 year in the offense, 845 receiving yards, 11 touchdowns. I'm looking at, the relative hit rates in terms of size, maybe how well A.D. Mitchell's game is going to translate to more consistency for fantasy football. I think Mitchell's the bigger winner here.
Well, he's definitely bigger for sure. We know that.
I do think he is literally the bigger winner here.
I do think he's a winner because I have him now as wide receiver 6. So I think he jumped a couple guys, including Troy Franklin and Keon Coleman. I think he is going to end up being a first round pick, and that's awesome for his dynasty value. I think he's going to go to one of these playoff teams, whether it's the Bills or the Chiefs or the Ravens or the Cowboys, and instantly be on a team with a good quarterback. So yeah, I agree. He's somebody that I think certainly gained value over the weekend, and I'm really excited about where he potentially lands in April's draft. Okay, we've got a lot of players that we need to talk about, including who's the number one running back from this class. We will get to that next. This episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Get buckets with your first bet on FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook, because right now, new customers can get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. That is $150 if your bet wins. Bet on all of your favorite NBA players and teams with quick bets, live same-game parlays, exclusive props, and more. Listen, now that the NFL Combine is done and we don't have actual football on the field for a while, I'm going to sit home, watch some NBA, and make some live, some of those same game parlays. So much fun. Just visit FanDuel.com/lockedon and shoot your shot with FanDuel, the official sportsbook partner of the NBA. Welcome back to the Locked On Dynasty Football Podcast. We want to let you know that Locked On has launched the first ever national sports 24/7 streaming channel on YouTube. And now it's also available on Amazon Fire TV and the free Fire TV channels app. Locked On Sports Today is here for you 24/7, covering the top sports stories of the day with the local experts of Locked On, plus our national shows covering every league. Find Locked On Sports Today now available on the free Fire TV channels app. All right, Kate. The running back one discussion is an interesting one when it comes to the rookie class. Did anyone impress you? I guess it would be on Saturday when the running backs were doing the drills.
See, here's the thing, Marcus. My guy, Jonathan Brooks, didn't get to participate. He's coming off a torn ACL. So he is my RB1 in this class. But I do want to talk about a guy named Trey Benson, who coming out of Florida State, you were pretty excited about in his overall combine performance. I mean, let's talk about it. He, came in 6 foot, 216 pounds, ran a 4.39 40-yard dash. Like, a really explosive player, and I think like his overall long speed translated really well to this NFL Combine, and has had 2 really solid back-to-back seasons with Florida State, 1,100 scrimmage yards in each of those seasons, coming off a 15 touchdown performance with Florida State. And you seem pretty hyped to see his NFL Combine results. Tell me why. And this is the word on the street. Some people may be looking at Trey Benson as this class's overall RB1. What is selling people on Trey Benson, and why should we be buying?
I mean, there's a couple different reasons for Trey Benson. So let's go back to before his days at Florida State. When he was at Oregon, he actually had a major knee injury where he tore his ACL, his MCL, and his meniscus. I believe that was in 2020, missed the 2020. Yeah, 2020, missed most of the 2021 season. Came back in 2022, looked good, was even better in 2023. There's just so many advanced stats on top of just watching him. Like, you watch his tape and it's so much fun. He is so violent and physical as a runner. And then adding on this 4.39 40 just makes me feel even better. But there's a stat out there about forced missed tackles per attempt, and he's the second best in the history of grading, according to Pro Football Focus. I think he's 0.39 missed tackles per rushing attempt, and the only one ahead of him was Bijan Robinson at 0.4 yards after, forced missed tackles. He's just so good at breaking tackles. He's so strong. He's so physical, and now with the 40. What are we missing, Kate? Now he's shown that he's overcome the knee injury. Why can't he be a top 10 dynasty running back?
That is a good and interesting point, is that, seeing that sort of season by season improvement post knee injury. And he is a violent runner. And that's very much like my bag of type of running back. Like, that is 100% my type. And the nice thing about that is that I do feel like a lot of times with these sort of violent runners that can force missed tackles, can also play through contact, like, you don't always see that top end speed. So Trey Benson feels like a really nice balance between, the overall physicality and the speed, and definitely something to, I think, continue to buy in. From a medicals perspective, is there anything concerning about that knee injury from a long-term perspective, do you think?
From everything that I've heard, he got some clean reports at the NFL Combine, and I think the athletic testing just showed you like there's no lingering effects. He hasn't lost any of the explosiveness. And then on top of that, Kate, one of the things that we've seen over the last couple of years is if you tear your ACL like early in your career, Nick Chubb did it in Georgia, Brees Hall did it in year one with the Jets. Those guys can bounce back relatively quickly, so that makes me feel better. The last thing on Benson before we go, I want to give you some stats from him from Pro Football Focus, their stable metrics from the 2022-2023 season. 96th percentile rushing grade, 100th percentile missed tackles forced per attempt, 91st percentile yards after the contact per attempt, 94th percentile zone grade, 86th percentile missed tackles forced after reception. Like he just has checked every single box when it comes to production and now the athleticism. I'm all in.
I think that's fair. Another running back I want to touch on real quick, Marshawn Lloyd, who I think had just an overall solid day. Coming in at just over 5'8", 220 pounds. I think had a really solid day from the NFL Combine, 4.46 40-yard dash, 36-inch vertical. Like just I think popped off the page a little bit in terms of that athleticism for that size in
Yes.
a group of running backs, like the kind of range that he's going in, like eh, Bucky Irving, Blake Corum, I think is a few steps ahead of him in that race, but still like not none of these guys kind of blew you out of the water with that production. Obviously, he's a little shorter, but that
Fine.
BMI to boot and playing at that BMI and performing as that type of athlete really kind of got my attention because I like to see a little extra cushion for the push-in on my running backs, a little extra cushion to take those big hits,
Sure.
but just an exciting day, I think, for Marshawn here.
Kate, if you look at like over the last 10 years, the running backs that are 220 pounds or heavier and that ran a 4.5 40-yard dash or faster, the list is very small. And then when you add on the production profile, which Marshawn Lloyd has, he's a really good and intriguing back in a running back class that lacks top end talent. So could he potentially pass some of these other players like Bucky Irving, who was a little bit disappointing? Absolutely. I thought Marshawn Lloyd had a really good day. And he is somebody that I am more likely to buy coming out of the combine. I had him ranked as like my RB5, RB6. I think I might move him up a little bit. I thought he was excellent.
Yeah, and I think even from kind of a perspective of looking at these prospects and who are the more well-rounded running backs, I do think Marshawn Lloyd, a pretty well-rounded guy, and I love the size. Obviously, like you look at the sample size, didn't have like a super high volume workload here at
No.
USC. Obviously, Caleb Williams, his rushing ability, whether that be design runs or scrambles, like kind of chipped away, I think, at maybe some of the potential targets even that we could have seen from Marshawn Lloyd. But just a really solid outing. You love to see that sort of size and athleticism combination. And again, I mentioned the fact that he hasn't had a ton of carries on the body, which I love a guy with some fresh legs heading into the NFL.
He hasn't had a lot of carries, but he's been incredible with the touches that he got. Again, I'm going to use
Mhm.
PFF stable metrics here. 87th percentile rushing grade, 99th percentile missed tackles forced per attempt, 99th percentile yards after contact per attempt, 100th percentile missed tackles forced per reception. Sometimes I like the running backs coming out of college that don't have a lot of workload on their
Yeah.
bodies because they're just fresher. And now you compare, or you give him plus 220 pounds and the 4.46 40-yard dash. He's got to be one of the biggest risers from the NFL Combine. Okay, let's dive into some other names that aren't as well known but destroyed the NFL Combine. We will get to them next. This episode is brought to you by BetterHelp. What's the first thing you'd do if you had an extra hour in your day? Would you go for a run? Would you take a nap? Would you read a book? A lot of us spend our lives wishing that we had more time. The question is, time for what? If time was unlimited, how would you use it? The best way to squeeze that special thing into your schedule is to know what's important to you and make it a priority. Therapy can help you find what matters to you so that you can go and do more of it. If you're thinking of starting therapy, give BetterHelp a try. It's done entirely online. It's designed to be convenient, flexible, and suited to your schedule. Just fill out a brief questionnaire to get matched with a licensed therapist, and you can switch therapists at any time for any reason at no additional charge. Learn to make time for what makes you happy with BetterHelp. Just visit betterhelp.com/lockedon today to get 10% off your first month. That is BetterHelp, HELP.com/lockedon. Welcome back to the Locked On Dynasty Football Podcast. On tomorrow's show, we're going to take a look at some players that maybe had some underwhelming combine performances and whether you should be buying or selling them. So make sure you tune in for that. But Kate, we got to talk about a certain running back that just had a huge day, Isaac Guerendo, who, I didn't see the official RAS, but I got to believe it's pretty close to 10. Is he somebody you're buying now after a huge combine?
He is. And Marcus, I think it is going to largely depend on how the rest of his pre-draft process shakes out. Like, wasn't currently projected to be drafted. He was projected to be an undrafted free agent. I have to imagine that changes here. Spent 4 years at Wisconsin before having, a quote unquote breakout season here in Louisville in 2023. Another one of these guys that we didn't see take on a ton of volume. He was a converted wide receiver out of high school. But Marcus, you look at his breakout season, again, that breakout season, and not a ton of volume, 154 touches, 1,044 scrimmage yards, 11 touchdowns, which pretty solid for a guy with just 132 rush attempts. But look at the combine, right? And you look at the speed, you look at the advanced metrics, the PFF stable metrics, 84th percentile or better in PFF rushing grade, yards after contact per attempt, receiving grade, missed forced tackles per reception, yards per route run. There's, I think, a lot to like here about Isaac Guerendo. He had a really solid combine. We mentioned sort of that size athleticism combo. 6 foot, 221 pounds, ran a 4.33 40-yard dash, Marcus, 41.5-inch vertical, like explosive metrics off the page, like off the charts. And again, for somebody that hasn't been overly productive in college, I have to wonder if that size explosiveness combination paired with some of the advanced metrics that we're gonna see here. I'm curious. Color me curious.
Yeah, we've seen this happen before where a running back will put up a big combine and then go from a priority free agent to a 5th round pick. Now, that might not seem like a huge jump, but it is for these players, right? To go from not being drafted at all to getting top 150 draft capital, it does matter. I think a good example of this would be like Chase Brown last year, who got drafted by the Bengals after a huge combine. Maybe he could be this version of Chase Brown. The ideal situation is like Isaiah Pacheco, who ran a really fast 40, ended up getting drafted in the 7th round by the Chiefs, went on to win that starting job. So of all the positions, running back is the one where we see this kind of movement based off of athleticism. So I think he has that going for him, and he's really cheap. So why not, if you're drafting today or if you've already done your rookie drafts, which I know some people do, go pick him up. I want to mention one other player before we go. Ricky Pearsall from Florida. A lot of receivers, Kate, in this class that had big combine performances. He's another one. Is he somebody that you are looking to buy after his big performance?
I'm very, very interested in Ricky Pearsall. And I mean, you look at, what he did in terms of speed. He ran a 4.41 40-yard dash, which in this particular class of wide receivers, doesn't necessarily jump off the
No,
page.
it's
Wasn't a
crazy.
big touchdown guy at Florida, but in his final 2 seasons, I think, you saw a lot of real life skills that are probably going to translate better. It seems like he's been a more popular name, in terms of like actual NFL draft production. He's projected to go in the second round here.
Mhm.
And I took some more time to watch his tape here in the final 2 seasons of Florida. I really like the way this guy moves. He's just over 6 foot, which that kind of height paired with his actual position, playing primarily in the slot throughout college, almost 60% of his snaps out of the slot. I love the height. I love the shiftiness. He's a really solid route runner. And I
Mhm.
think that coming out and seeing his athletic performance of 42-inch vertical, just under 11 feet on the broad jump, like I think that this is going to probably solidify his spot in the second round. And I think that, maybe a team like the Buffalo Bills, for
Sure.
example,
Sure.
who do need a really solid wide receiver too, and a guy that can play in the slot, I think that might be as dynamic as Pearsall could be. Color me interested, because I think he could be a really interesting, maybe not, a 1,500 receiving yard, 10
No, no.
touchdown guy, but especially in full PPR formats, I'm really digging his potential as like a wide receiver 2, wide receiver 3.
You mentioned the Bills. The Bills are one of these teams that really cares about your 40 and your shuttle times. 4.41 40, 4.05 shuttle, 94th percentile, 6.4 3 cone, 100th percentile. There are a lot of teams that just really love the metrics. They're going to love Ricky Pearsall. On top of the route running, like the dude just gets open, and you see why, because he's so athletic. I agree. He was somebody for me, that when I was watching him on tape, I thought, okay, this is a top 75 player in the draft. There's just no way he gets outside the top 60 picks now, even in a loaded wide receiver class, because again, he checks too many boxes, especially when you consider where he's coming from in the SEC. I love this call by you. He's one of the biggest winners.
What a time to be a wide receiver.
What a
I
time.
think
What a class.
this is going to be a really, really fun rookie draft season, I think, for dynasty managers, because there are so many players that you could have a bunch of late round picks, and I think you're still going to have your kind of pick of the lot in terms of potential upside. This is a really fun and exciting draft class.
Absolutely.
And tomorrow we will be talking about some of those more disappointing players. But hey, the NFL Combine isn't everything, so we might be able to find ourselves some diamonds in the rough there,
Yes.
moving forward.
All right, that is it for today's show. We want to thank you for making Locked On Dynasty your first listen every day. Go make your second listen Locked On Fantasy Football. I joined Michelle Majuk over there this morning to discuss some of the biggest winners and losers from the combine, where we see the quarterbacks going in this class. So make sure you check out that as well. Go follow Kate on Twitter at Kate Majuk. I'm at Marcus _Mosier, and we will see you right back here tomorrow.